Hey, okay, fantastic. So I would like to welcome you all to kind of the next piece of the agenda. And to start off, I'll maybe just do a little bit of an introduction of T-CAIREM and myself and kind of what we do here. So like I said, my name is January and I'm the Data Governance and Quality Analyst for T-CAIREM, which stands for the Temerty Center for AI Research and Education in Medicine. This is a research center at the U of T that is responsible for basically all things to do with AI in health. We are an interdisciplinary center that counts among our members professors and researchers and students and excited enthusiasts from computer science, data science, engineering, the health space, whether like clinical or medical research or biological research. We have a great variety of different members, and we're also actually a national and even international center. T-CAIREM also has a network of 24 different universities across Canada, as well as 2 internationally. We are the largest AI in health center in Canada, and one of the largest in the world as well. And we have a few activities that we do as part of T-CAIREM that all kind of center around a few different themes of research, education, and infrastructure. Infrastructure being the data arm, which is what I'm most familiar with and what you will all be most familiar with at the end of this 2-day workshop. But another one of our important aspects is education. And so it is very exciting that as we are doing this datathon, we're also coupling with one of our other main activities, which is our Temerty Speaker Series. And we're very excited to be able to present to you our keynote speaker as part of the datathon, as well as part of our ongoing speaker series. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. Before we get to that, just a few important notes. We want to acknowledge that the land that the University of Toronto, and indeed the land that the Google office sits on, has been part of the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and Mississaugas of the Credit for thousands and thousands of years. It is still the meeting place of Indigenous people across Turtle Island, part of the historic area covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt, as well as more recently part of Treaty 13 or the Toronto Purchase. So let's all keep in mind the land that we are on and pay respect to what we are all doing here as we are sitting here, to learn and educate ourselves and be part of a tradition of education that goes back thousands and thousands of years. The Temerty Center for AI Research and Education in Medicine has also been made possible by the generous donation from the Temerty family. Like I said, our goal as an interdepartmental center is to bring together people from all kinds of different backgrounds and ultimately to transform health through AI. I just want to double check at this point, we also have part of an online Google Meet through this event. Are we all hooked up online and the people online can see us? Fantastic. So I'll also mention for anyone who's joining us online that this event is CPD accredited for physicians. If you are going to get your CPD accreditation, please use the QR code that we will show on screen at the end of this event. We'll also have a discussion portion at the end of the talk, and that'll be an opportunity to bring in any questions both from the audience here in the room as well as the virtual audience online, which is very exciting. Might even get a little bit of, hopefully a little bit of crosstalk between the 2 audiences, and maybe we'll all be thinking about some questions and some ideas that we hadn't thought about before. I'll maybe just throw this up on the screen now as well. If you want to join T-CAIREM, if you want to look at all of the resources we have available to us, here are the websites and sources for you to go and do so. We highly recommend coming and checking out everything that we have to offer at T-CAIREM. There is a lot of cool stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and these datathons are only one of the kind of very public arms of what we do at T-CAIREM. So I think you'll all benefit a lot from checking out what we have and giving it a look. So without any further ado, I would love to introduce our 2 speakers for today, Mark Boulos and Sarah Berger. Dr. Mark Boulos is a stroke and sleep neurologist, associate professor, and senior scientist in the Division of Neurology at the U of T and at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. He also serves as the medical lead for the Sunnybrook Sleep Laboratory, program director for the Sleep Neurology Fellowship Program at the U of T. Dr. Boulos oversees an active research program that investigates the association of sleep disorders with TIA and stroke, dementia, and other neurological disorders. Sarah Berger is a research coordinator at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. She's currently the lead research coordinator for Dr. Mark Boulos, managing and conducting more than 15 active research projects and clinical trials. She's mainly involved with investigating the diagnosis and treatment of various sleep disorders. And one exciting thing you'll note is that the data set, one of the 3 data sets for this event, is actually one of the data sets that Dr. Mark and Sarah have put together and have put a lot of work into making available to all of you as part of furthering the goal of open access to data and getting more researchers access to the data that we have. So thank you so much to you all for being here. Thank you so much to Dr. Mark and Sarah for being here. And please feel free to come on up and give our guests a warm round of applause.
So thank you so much for being here. And it's a real pleasure for Sarah and I to present this data. Sarah and I have worked very closely for a number of years, and one of our main projects over the last few years has been the development of this data set. So we're very, very excited to discuss it with you and take your questions at the end. We have to, everything you have to do, you have to put a conflict of interest slide, so that's mine. Sarah doesn't have any conflict. She's unconflicted. I don't have any conflicts of interest related to this talk. So we'll talk about first, I'll take care of the first and the last sections, and Sarah will talk about the data set in more detail, which is what she actually worked very hard to assemble. But I'm going to first talk about why is good quality sleep necessary for optimal health. Then we're going to talk about the operations of the clinical sleep laboratory. Sarah will talk about that. And how that can capture, actually it's a clinical operation, but how we've transformed that to actually collect research data that could be shared with groups like yourselves and other people around the world. We'll also talk about specifically the Nexus, the data Nexus data set from the sleep laboratory. And then finally, we'll close off on future applications for sleep and AI. So first of all, let's talk about why is good quality sleep necessary for your health? And there are a number of reasons. There's a huge number of reasons. In fact, if you look at cognitively, physically, good quality sleep is so important for your brain and really for all your organ systems. And so I remember when I was in your shoes a number of years ago, my parents would always tell me, come on, stay up, Mark. Stay up. You want to get good grades, get into medical school, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And always, the value of sleep was always less emphasized, right? It was like staying up and all that kind of stuff was the key. I think you guys in your generation is a lot smarter. You guys are more healthy and, taking care of yourselves. Sarah and I have spoken about this together, that, that there's been more of an emphasis on health and, and sleep and overall well-being, which is super, super, super important. But we can't take away, I think if you're sleep deprived, you're staying up all night to study for an exam and you come do the exam the next day, compared to an exam you came to with a full night of sleep, you know that you could probably perform better on a full night of sleep, right? So lots of different things, but it goes beyond the brain. It actually, good quality sleep can affect the heart, can affect your risk of obesity, diabetes, and other important health conditions. So super, super important. Sometimes underappreciated, but it's super important. So, there's been always a question is why do you need to sleep? Like sleep, if you think about it from an evolution point of view, is actually a pretty stupid idea, right? You're sitting there immobile, a lion can eat you, all that kind of stuff, So there's got to be a very, very, very important reason why you want to sleep or why you must sleep. So there is a number of reasons. Number one is that, sleep could potentially help with tissue growth and repair, can help with the immune system, can help also replay memories, can help, there's some evidence, and some of you, if you're in psychology, might be aware, it may be helpful for memory consolidation, but also can affect the blood pressure, heart rates during sleep, and growth hormones as well. We've done some work in our lab has shown that sleep is actually, during sleep, you clear out toxins that develop in your brain, and then you can actually, so if you don't sleep well or you have poor quality sleep, you'll have a buildup of toxins in your brain, which can lead to harmful things like stroke and dementia and so on and so forth. So, without getting too complicated, there are different stages of sleep, which you all know. Stages, wake, 1, 2, 3, and REM. And there are a number of different physiological changes that are occurring in the brain. And so when you delve into the data set, you'll actually see that there are some important changes here. These were standardized internationally in 2007, and there's been revisions to that. The leading body for this work has been the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. But basically, awake is when you have, you score sleep in 30-second epochs. That's important. And wake is when the EEG activity is greater than 50% alpha and beta. So alpha and beta are the, particularly alpha, you guys should all be in alpha right now if you're awake. If you're really sleepy, you might be going into the theta range. I don't blame you. Stage 1 would be, this transitional sleep stage where you have a low voltage, fast EEG activity, and your eye movements. You know, as someone, if you watch someone who's getting sleepy, their eye movements might be rolling around. Stage 2 sleep is when you get also sleep spindles as well as K complexes. And the sleep spindles are these fast bursts of activity. K complexes are more high amplitude sharp waves. So I can just show you an example of that, so I want to make sure I don't start a laser on this thing. So, it takes me back. That's okay. So, so the point is that you can see some examples over here on the left of your screen, and then stage 3 is deeper sleep, and then REM has a bunch of also physiological things where the physiological changes actually appear a lot like wake. So that there is actually the theta and alpha waves, but also lower EMG activity, and that's often where dreaming is thought to occur. Though you can have dreaming at all stages, it's predominantly in REM sleep. So here are the different changes that occur during sleep. You'll have changes in your brain activity according to the sleep stage. Heart rate will slow down in non-REM. It increases actually, and it's a little bit more varied compared to non-REM. The blood pressure will decrease from wakefulness, but the blood pressure will decrease in non-REM, but in REM sleep, it was actually going to increase, and it's going to be different than a non-REM. And then sympathetic nerve activity will also have some changes, as well as your muscle tone. And one of the really important things in sleep, particularly in REM sleep, is that you've lost your muscle tone. Like, there's basically all your muscles become paralyzed. In fact, REM sleep is a good model for anesthesia that occurs that might be induced if you're going to undergo an operation. And if an individual no longer has loss of that muscle tone during REM sleep, it can be indicative of a neurological condition like Parkinson's, and we can discuss a little bit more of that down the line. So again, any abnormalities in sleep can actually underlie more important things down the line, potentially like other medical conditions. There's other things that change too as well. The blood flow in the brain actually decreases from wakefulness during non-REM sleep, but then in REM it actually increases a little bit more compared to non-REM. Respiration changes as well. There's changes in airway resistance, body temperature changes, and so on and so forth. And then if you want to go into the nitty-gritty kind of stuff, the waves themselves, actually, you can have different waves. And this is where some of these, this is where I think a lot of labs can go a little bit deeper, because you just look at the wave morphology and it can be indicative of different changes, not only in sleep architecture, but also there's like, not only does the sleep have the architecture, but the microarchitecture might be very, very, very important. The reason why I put this slide up is because this might be very important as you design, models and stuff that are going to pull up maybe sleep stages or different health states. So I have some colleagues around the world who are looking at really, for example, sleep spindles and how do they consolidate with memory. This is some work we've also done in our lab, but can the characteristic of just the sleep spindle, which I told you occurs in stage 2 most typically, but can that actually be indicative of a cognitive change or outcomes in terms of health? So again, there's some details. The devil is always in the details here, but you can truly, when you understand and when you're digging deep into these things, you can see differences that may be very important for health that has major clinical consequences. So it's known that also that after you treat, or if you treat sleep disorders, you can improve outcomes. So this is a meta-analysis generally showed that improvements in sleep quality can change mental health. And we know that sleep affects everything like cognitive performance, physical performance, but also things like heart disease, high blood pressure, obesity, and stroke. I had a colleague who's hired out of Calgary to actually lead the sleep training for Olympic athletes, for the Canadian Olympic athletes, because they realize that if you can improve the sleep of the athletes at the highest level, really for the Olympics, you can improve our overall medal standing and success and so on. So again, super important. So I'm just gonna touch on a few disorders that we would study at the Sunnybrook Sleep Laboratory, which would be sleep apnea, or the grab-all term for sleep apnea is like sleep disorder breathing. That will include things you've heard of probably before, like obstructive sleep apnea, central sleep apnea, and other things like that. Restless leg syndrome and periodic limb movements, narcolepsy, which some of you might have heard, and related closely to that is something called idiopathic hypersomnia, and also insomnia and parasomnia. So we're just going to jump in there and talk about potential relevance also for health. So obstructive sleep apnea is when you have episodes of complete, and a complete stoppage of breathing is called an apnea, or a partial collapse or a partial stoppage of breathing is called a hypopnea. And this is, again, these are collapses or stoppages of breathing at the level of the airway. And this is normally associated with either a drop in your oxygen or an arousal from sleep. An arousal from sleep is just basically like an awakening of your brain from sleep. Central sleep apnea is a little bit different. The central sleep apnea is when the brain doesn't send the correct signal to trigger breathing. So, and basically the brain doesn't send the signal to trigger the muscles that need you to breathe to start breathing. And basically you see the chest not actually mounting any effort to breathe, okay? And that can come with things like, for example, a drug overdose if someone took too many sleeping pills or something like that, God forbid, or sometimes also some different neurological issues can cause that as well, something like this at the level of the neck or so on and so forth. So sleep apnea, if you see people who are super sleepy, during sleep they might be snoring really loudly, gasping for air, having headaches in the morning. And again, sleep apnea could be linked up with many, many, many different troubles, as we mentioned, probably the leading cause for medical issues. But things like depression, diabetes, stroke. I'm a stroke neurologist, so I see a lot of patients with sleep apnea in my practice, cognitive impairment, and also increased mortality risk. So this is some work I did with one of our talented residents, Dr. Dharma Kulasilan, and we have some models basically for around like why physiologically is sleep apnea linked with increased risk of stroke. And you can see over here, there's a number of different pathways that if anybody's interested, happy to chat with them further after. But really important, the New England Journal of Medicine, the leading medical journal, or one of the leading medical journals, 20 years ago published, this landmark paper showing that sleep apnea was actually an independent risk factor for stroke and death. So really, after you control for age, for sex, for all the different vascular risk factors, alcohol intake, and so on and so forth, even if you did all that, with your statistical modeling, it showed still that sleep apnea was linked up with an increased risk of death and of stroke. And there's a number of things there. Other work has also proven the same thing, that again, sleep apnea, particularly in moderate to severe forms, is linked up with an increased risk of these adverse events. Also linked with a higher risk of hypertension, cardiovascular events, and atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation, some of you might know, is an irregular heart rhythm that increases the risk of stroke. So from a pragmatic point of view, when we look at stroke risk factors, here are the stroke risk factors I've listed on the slide, things like hypertension, which is having high blood pressure, smoking, diabetes, atrial fibrillation. If you look at that and compare the relative risk, these are adjusted relative risks for stroke. In fact, sleep apnea is right up there with things that are very common like smoking and atrial fibrillation and having other risk factors, okay? Some work that I've done, also some work aside from sleep apnea. I actually did my master's degree in restless leg syndrome. Tells you can do a master's degree in anything, but it is actually a very, 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 very important condition. Joking aside, and this is when people have an urge to move their legs, particularly towards the end of the day or at night, and it can actually be very, very, very disabling. So my patients who come in with refractory restless legs are often more disabled they're actually often more disabled than even those coming in with stroke, if you could believe that, okay? Because their quality of life is so badly affected. And a restless leg syndrome, as I mentioned, can lead to difficulty falling asleep, can lead to daytime fatigue, trouble concentrating, cognitive issues. And a lot of people who have restless legs have something called PLMs, which I'm going to just go back here. PLMs are these involuntary leg kicking that occurs at night. Okay, so involuntary leg kicking that occur at night. So you can think of restless legs as being the symptoms. Periodic limb movements are the motor. Basically, it's the motor manifestation of the condition. Okay, so why do we bother to talk about this? We know that stroke can give rise to restless legs, PLMs. I've published work in that area as have others. But the question is, can these conditions, the restless legs and the periodic limb movements, can they give rise to stroke? And by the way, just another name for stroke is cerebrovascular disease, okay? So that's just the grab-all name for stroke and for other conditions, basically other vascular conditions that would affect the brain. And there's a number of theories, theories that might link up restless legs with periodic limb movements, including autonomic arousals, inflammation, oxidative stress, nocturnal activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system, and there could be shared risk factors, sleep disturbance, and anxiety, sleep disorders. You'll notice that if you go to medical school, you'll notice that, in fact, oxidative stress inflammation is the link between every single condition with everything else, right? So you'll see that pretty soon, particularly with vascular conditions. So some seminal work was done a number of years ago, and it suggested that these periodic limb movements, this leg kicking that occurred at night, in fact, it could lead to fluctuations in blood pressure. And anytime blood pressure fluctuates, that's a bit of a problem. And this is one of the reasons why sleep apnea is harmful, because there can be fluctuations, because there are fluctuations in blood pressure as well with those conditions. An interesting paper by a collaborator published a couple of years ago suggested that, in fact, if you treat restless legs, you can actually reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. And this was over several years of follow-up and published in a pretty good journal. So, the bottom line is that restless legs in this work was associated with a higher risk of CVD or cardiovascular diseases. However, restless legs was associated with a significantly less future risk of cardiovascular disease after it was treated compared to those who didn't get treated, okay? So just something to keep in the back of your mind. The data is not as well established as for sleep apnea, but certainly this is like an emerging area of work. So again, restless legs, periodic limb movements may be linked with vascular disease, and they come after a stroke for sure. Whether treating them or not can reduce vascular diseases, there's initial evidence that might be the case. It's still, though, the work is still being done in this area. I don't know if you know or any of you have narcolepsy. You don't need to put up your hand. It's okay. But the point is that narcolepsy is actually very, very disabling as well. Some people, they're extremely sleepy. They're very, 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 very tired. As they're falling asleep or as they're waking up, they may see hallucinations. And they have very, very, very disrupted nocturnal sleep. Type 1 narcolepsy is with cataplexy. The picture there's someone with strong emotional stimuli. They'll lose their muscle tone. Okay, so birthday party, someone singing birthday. I have a patient who they're singing happy birthday for, and then she just face plants into the cake. So this is actually a video of one of my. This video here is one of my mentors has a video of that for that young lady. Type 2 would be without cataplexy, so without that collapse of the muscles with strong emotion. And this is really narcolepsy is basically the brain's inability to be able to regulate the switch from wake to sleep, and also from within sleep from REM to non-REM. Okay, so these people, as soon as they fall asleep, they'll be getting into REM sleep, meaning they'll be having dreams right off the bat, and also they have a number of things during the day. So the cataplexy is basically a manifestation of the loss of muscle tone, right? So we know that REM is associated with the loss of muscle tone, and so they have basically the intrusion or the intrusion of REM into the daytime, which is obviously a problem. Idiopathic hypersomnia is a fairly rare condition, but it's on the same continuum now in the latest classification for these conditions. It's on a continuum with narcolepsy, okay? And this is people who are super, super sleepy, have a hard time waking up from sleep, and daytime brain fog, with cognitive cloudiness. So I know like a lot of people say, well, I kind of have that, but you probably are sleep deprived, because everybody in university is sleep deprived. But if, the question is, after, if I shipped you away, took away your university studies or whatever, and told you just sleep every single day as much as you wanted to, a normal person will catch up in their sleep eventually after a couple of days, right? No matter how sleep deprived you are. People with narcolepsy, no matter how much they sleep, they're always sleepy, okay? And if that's your situation, you should seek medical attention. But if you're just simply sleep deprived, catch up on your sleep, right? That's that. So there's different ways, and I'm going to highlight this. Sarah and I wanted to highlight this because some of the data as part of this data set will be the multiple sleep latency test, which is actually a daytime sleep study. So the way we test people for narcolepsy and for these related conditions is we have them sleep overnight in the sleep laboratory, And then during the day, they do something called the multiple sleep latency test, okay? Which is where they get multiple chances to do a daytime sleep test. So basically, they have multiple chances every 2 hours to take a nap, okay? And that provides some helpful data for a clinician to know whether or not someone has narcolepsy. Insomnia is also very, very important. This is difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep. And insomnia can lead to poor health, of course, daytime sleepiness, reduced productivity, and so on, so depression, metabolic syndrome, and so on and so forth. Often self-reported, but we can use actigraphy, you can use your smartwatches, and so on and so forth to more definitively and objectively assess that. So insomnia is comorbid with a lot of bad things like mental health conditions, sleep disturbances, pain, even heart failure. And again, people will be sleepy, inattentive, cognitively impaired. This is a slide from one of my colleagues in Laval University, but the bottom line, and this individual, Dr. Morin, is an expert in insomnia. The bottom line is that as you have more sleep symptoms related to insomnia, you have a higher risk of hypertension, and you also have a higher risk of myocardial infarction or heart attack over time, when followed over time. Likewise, also, people with insomnia have a higher risk of diabetes, hypertension, and also cognitive impairment and dementia. And there's a lot of good evidence for that now. Parasomnias might be of interest to you: sleepwalking, sleep talking, night terrors, like nightmares, confusion, or arousals. And those sort of things that occur in non-REM. In REM sleep is other things like RBD, or REM sleep behavior disorder, which is closely linked with things like Parkinson's disease. There's also sleep paralysis. There's what we call hypnagogic hypopompic hallucinations. Hypnagogic hallucinations are those. So basically, these are as people are falling asleep or they're waking up, they have hallucinations. Okay. So again, it could be a major problem, because if you're walking around in your sleep when you should be sleeping, and I've had people jump out of buildings, and people are like, oh my God, if I got a phone call from the ICU, then it's like someone hopped out of a building, and initially they thought it was like a suicide attempt, but it turns out in fact the person has a sleep disorder. They're not suicidal. They don't have any psychiatric history. They had a perfect life, but they had a sleep disorder that needs to be urgently treated. So parasomnias can lead to disrupted sleep and injuries, and I've seen some, unfortunately, some that nearly resulted in death. And again, we said REM sleep behavior disorder. Again, that's when the body can no longer paralyze itself. It can be linked. The body can no longer paralyze itself during REM sleep. In fact, could be indicative of something like a synucleinopathy. And one of the most common synucleinopathies is Parkinson's disease. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. Sarah's been my wonderful coordinator for many years, and she'll talk about our clinical operations in the sleep lab, as well as the data set. Okay? So, thanks, Sarah.
So just to give a little background on kind of how we're collecting the data that you guys are going to use in the data set that's part of the Health Data Nexus. So here's just a kind of overview of the clinical operations and kind of how a sleep lab works, in case you aren't familiar with it. So they start out by being referred by a sleep specialist. So you would, if someone's complaining of a sleep disorder, they would see either their primary care doctor or be referred to a sleep specialist. They would come into the sleep lab at 8 p.m. They'd get a set of questionnaires to complete for their medical history, their sleep symptoms, basically a big battery of questions, and that's going to be part of the data set. Then they get hooked up with all these wires and complete the overnight sleep test in a hospital bed. Then the next morning they wake up, complete a morning questionnaire, basically how did you sleep, what kind of things happened, did you dream, that kind of thing. And then, as discussed about before, there's also an optional daytime test, so that multiple sleep latency test, or a maintenance of wakefulness test. It's a similar idea, just it's are you able to stay awake rather than can you fall asleep. And then afterwards, the data is scored and reviewed by sleep technologists, and so they're scoring for things like the stage of sleep, other events like an apnea and a hypopnea, leg movements, that kind of thing. So of course, these studies couldn't be run without our wonderful team. Dr. Boulos, you see here, it was also started by Dr. Brian Murray. We have other sleep doctors at Sunnybrook. And then, of course, the sleep technologists, they are the backbone of the lab. They run everything, led by Dana. And yeah, so they're the people that kind of do all the operations of the Sunnybrook Sleep Lab. So this is what kind of overnight polysomnography looks like. As you can see in the cartoon, okay, now to sleep normally, it's a bit of a tall task, but it's the best way to get the data. So those are kind of an example of all the wires that are administered to a patient. But they're not just there for fun, they're measuring important data. So polysomnography, or PSG, is the recording of multiple physiological signals during sleep. So these are all important. The signals include electroencephalography, or EEG, which is the brain wave. So that's the set of wires that are attached to the scalp. Electrooculography, or EOG, this is the eye movements. These are really important for looking at things like REM, because that's how you kind of tell whether they're in REM sleep or not. Are their eyes moving back and forth? They also are attached to the limbs to see if there's any limb movements going on. There's a finger sensor for measuring heart rate and blood oxygen level. There's belts around the chest to measure chest effort. So when you're looking at things like sleep apnea, are they making effort to breathe or not? Body position, so is someone sleeping on their back? Are they sleeping on their side? Oftentimes people will have sleep apnea when they're on their back, but not on their side. So that's important to kind of tell, because then you can use kind of positional therapy to treat them. And snoring, so we get like an audio sensor. So this is the actual system that's recorded at the Sunnybrook Sleep Lab. They use this program called Compumedics, and that's kind of an example output of the kind of data we would get. And it is capturing things that I talked about: EEG, EOG, EMG, which is the muscle movements, SpO2, or blood oxygen level, airflow. So there's like a nasal cannula also that's measuring the breathing throughout the night, chest effort, snoring, pulse, body position, and there's also video recordings. We don't have that in the data set for privacy reasons, but that's important for like acting out dream behaviors. You can get a sense of that, also safety. So it's not just the raw data. The technologists will score the data set, and we will get kind of sleep study summary metrics. This will also be included in the data set that you have to work with. So things like time in bed. So this is the time from lights out to their final awakening. Wake after sleep onset, which is kind of the total minutes of any awakenings after they've started sleep. Total sleep time. So the time from sleep onset to the final awakening minus their wake after sleep onset. Sleep efficiency, or the ratio of total sleep time to time in bed. Or the percentage of time that they actually slept. Sleep onset latency, so this is the time from lights out to when they start sleeping. Time in, these are the sleep stages. The apnea-hypopnea index, so this is the amount of apneas or hypopneas per hour of sleep. So this is kind of the main tool that we use to diagnose sleep apnea. Oxygen saturation, so you can get the mean oxygen saturation and the minimum. So are they desaturating to unhealthy levels? We want people to be kind of at 95 and above. That's normal, but if it goes lower, it's important to know. And then periodic limb movement index. So are they moving their limbs during sleep? And then our next objective is to kind of describe the Sunnybrook Sleep Laboratory Health Data Nexus data set. So this is the data that you're going to be using, and so we want to just show you kind of how it's collected and what the final product is. So this is kind of an overview of the data transformation process. So we start with the raw sleep study data, clinical data, and eventually blood pressure data. We're going to be having that coming soon. So the raw sleep study data, that's the data that's collected on that Profusion software that I gave you. So these raw signals are, they can be exported to an EDF or an ASCII file. I think we gave them to you in EDF format. And then also the clinician scored summary metrics are exported to an Excel file. So these are like those time in bed, AHI, that kind of thing. Clinical data, so the questionnaire data is collected on tablets from the participants right before their sleep study. So these are a bunch of different questionnaires. You'll get like a really good overview of their medical history. Do they have any other disorders? And also their medication information. So what kind of medications are they taking, how much, that kind of thing. And then blood pressure data, it's coming soon because it's not included in the data set that we gave you, but we have this device called a vital stream, and it collects beat-to-beat blood pressure data. So it's really cool. You get like at the moment it's happening, blood pressure data. And this data then gets written to an Excel file that can be kind of time-stamped to the rest of the data. So we're really interested in looking at things like how does blood pressure change during an apnea or something like that, because that data is pretty rare. So here's an example of some of the questionnaires. So things like a comorbidity questionnaire, what other conditions do they have, insomnia questionnaire, sleep quality questionnaire, just general information about how they're sleeping. There's a whole set of them, so there's lots of data for you guys. So there's 3 components of the data set that we've uploaded. So there's an Excel file with all that clinical questionnaire information, the summary metrics from the clinician scored events. And then there's a Word file that's kind of the legend for all that data that describes what's meant in all of the Excel file columns. And then, of course, the raw PSG data, or it's presented in an EDF file. So those are the actual waves that you'll get from all the different signals. Okay, and I'll pass it back to Dr. Boulos.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful overview. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes just talking about potential applications. I mean, really, the sky is the limit, right? This is really, the questions you asked, really with this data set, and with, of course, with other data sets as well, for what you can use this for. So, a couple of things we were thinking about was like, right now, AI could be used to to stage sleep as well as to score events. So it can look for these, remember the sleep microarchitecture I had discussed with you, the spindles, the K complexes, but also more importantly, how could some of these properties, how could some of these microstructure or even macrostructure events relate to things like different medical conditions, age, health, cognition, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of medication use. How could that, how could all those be associated? And then, we spend for someone who oversees a sleep laboratory, we spend a huge amount of money on scoring sleep studies, like thousands, maybe millions of dollars every year, right? Just to hire tech, maybe not millions, but a large amount of money to hire technologists and to report these things, and hiring the physicians and so on and so forth. But the question is, can AI be used to actually create our reports? Could AI be used to look at all this data, score it, make a clinical sense out of it into something that's meaningful? And there are some of these things emerging right now, but and some algorithms are coming out, and some of them are used potentially in the States, but nothing's become really mainstream. So there's always room to move on this area where you can automate things. And certainly, I haven't seen any software yet that can replace a physician, nor really a sleep technologist. We still need them, and these people will always be needed. I'm not trying to put everybody out of business, but my point though is that can we assist people though with with getting the bare bone structures in place, and again detecting things like the ECG, movement, snoring, sleep apnea, and so on and so forth. So this was an interesting paper that we came across recently. You can input someone's age, gender, body mass index, and just their heart rate during sleep. And then it was able to tell you whether or not they had none to mild sleep apnea compared to more moderate to severe sleep apnea, using only 4 parameters. Now this is pretty interesting because you don't need to go to a sleep laboratory to get a heart rate, right? You can wear your smartwatch, you can wear whatever, right? And so if you just input age, your gender, and BMI, and collect objectively the heart rate data overnight using another, like a smart device, then you can almost remove the sleep laboratory here, right? So that would save society thousands of dollars. Every sleep study just to run it, the bare costs somewhere between $1,000 to operate it. For example, somewhere like Sunnybrook needs about $1,500 to $2,000 to run a single sleep study. Okay, just including physician costs, lab operating costs, the technology who stays overnight, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things to get. And then don't forget, we run like 1,000 or more sleep studies every year. Times that by we run about 1,000 times $2,000 saved. You have a lot of money saved potentially overall. I don't want sleep labs to go out of business, don't get me wrong, but my point is that can we help people, overall? How can we help people overall with something like this? Okay. Other things that have been done in the literature include things similar to like picking up arousals. Arousals are awakening from sleep, and you can see over here some machine learning AI work that's been done here to basically to detect arousals from sleep, and with pretty good sensitivity and specificities. Our lab in the sleep has also collaborated with researchers at TMU to use machine learning to pick up things like pick up periodic limb movements, both from actigraphy and also from sleep studies as well. And then, can you combine someone's health history? Could you take their sleep study plus put in all the cool data that we're collecting at the sleep lab that Sarah told you about, and can you put them in here? And can you get diagnoses just right off the bat, even almost removing a physician from the whole picture, right? So can we train these models appropriately in such a way that we can tell apart narcolepsy from other similar conditions? Also sleep apnea, like all stoppages in breathing are not created equal, right? And there's been a large, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but one of the most common treatments for sleep apnea is CPAP, but about half of people can't tolerate it, right? So there might be something we're missing here, that not all sleep apnea is created equal. Not all diseases are the same thing. And we might be missing important phenotyping for different diseases, and that may have very important implications, because maybe I can use a CPAP, but you can't, or vice versa. Maybe you can, I can't, and there might be because my sleep apnea is different than yours, right? So it's very, very, very important to go a little bit deeper, not just to label people, but then to have more specific, phenotypes for these different conditions. And then can we also generate different risk profiles for these? So maybe my sleep apnea is really bad, it can lead to higher risk of stroke and death, but yours is actually okay. Maybe yours is less important to treat if it's not causing symptoms. Or maybe yours is going to cause lots of symptoms, mine won't. So every one of us is different, and we have the potential here to look down the line and to see what could be, what's harmful and what's not. And then also some work we've done in collaboration with ICES and collaborators across Canada, including Dr. Kandurska in Ottawa. We actually have a paper that we published showing that sleep disorders can actually predict the development of cancer. Okay, so when we used some AI applications and advanced statistics to show you that, again, linking it with larger data sets like that data from ICES, which we're actually working on to link our current data set that you guys will have available to you to actually do that. So, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine has actually developed an AI subcommittee, which has a lot of applications that they've discussed, things like commercial devices, these generative AI approaches, also not only to help patients, but also to create more awareness. So a lot of the times people don't know what's going on, and people don't realize that their problem they have is actually a problem. Also, potentially could we use machine learning to triage patients into care pathways? So basically, rather than waiting a year to see a sleep specialist and waiting another couple of months to do a sleep study, and everything is protracted, by the time you get diagnosed with sleep apnea, it's kind of delayed. And I think if any of you have waited for a specialist, you can see that the system is extremely, extremely stretched. Also, can AI help us with increasing access to sleep care and to healthcare in general? So things like, can we use remote applications like smartwatches, things that we can do at home, actigraphy, other monitors? We've been collaborating on a large grant for, again, across multiple sites in Ontario. Can we detect changes in sleep? But not only even sleep, can we detect just changes in breathing, oxygen, and so on and so forth? And can this go back to the clinician? And then finally, for AI and sleep surveillance, can we monitor sleep over time? Can this be linked to the EHRs or electronic health records and so on and so forth? And can we have public-facing apps as well, and patient-facing apps, and also clinician-facing apps? So in conclusion, I think it's a very, very exciting time to be in your shoes, and to be having potential data sets available to work here. I think, again, I really do think the sky's the limit for what can be done here. I think we've provided an overview of why sleep is important. Sarah gave a wonderful overview of the data that we have and how it's garnered from the laboratory. And then also we've given some applications at the end here potentially for what you could do. So thanks again, and thank you, Sarah, for presenting. And that's it. So if we have any questions or any discussion, we can definitely discuss now and chat, okay? Yeah. Yeah, sure. I guess are you going to hand out microphones, or how are you going to do it? Here we go. Thanks.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I'll have a microphone and I'll be wandering the room with questions. We'll also be taking questions from the audience online. We'll maybe try to do one-on-one. And I'll just, Mark and Sarah, I'll just ask that you sort of broadly repeat the question into the mic, or at least summarize it, just so that everyone can hear it online. Yeah, go for it.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm interested in the sleep phenotypes that you spoke about. So in this data set, if you were to have to pick a couple of your data points, like what is the most important things you would use to try and cluster like a sleep phenotype at this point? Like, is it age? Is it the oxygen saturation?
Yeah, that's great. So I would probably go and I would pick, first of all, there's a literature on this, okay, already in this area. So I wouldn't start from scratch, but there is the opportunity though to look at further phenotyping and so on. So there's a guy called Danny Eckert. I forgot where he's from. I think it's from Australia, but Eckert. Danny is the first name. And so he's done some work, and there's basically 4 phenotypes, okay? But just without belaboring the point, I'm gonna just slide back. Oh, can we go back? I guess I can't go back, okay. So I would probably look at things like as you said, the oxygen, but also the flow. Look at chest efforts, okay? And I would look at some of those more raw signals for where things are also. So basically, I guess the thing is that to get to a certain AHI is considered the apnea-hypopnea index, which is the overall sleep apnea severity. So that, again, apnea-hypopnea index, and that's the overall sleep apnea severity. But you can reach that through different ways. So you'll see that people will have, like for example, some people will have more hypopneas compared to apneas. Even within the same, I'm just giving one example. So because the apnea-hypopnea index is the combination, it's basically the addition of the apneas plus the hypopneas, all right, divided into time. But you'll have a lot more, you can have some people who have a lot of apneas, people have a lot of hypopneas. So that means that the brain and the body overall, some brains are more susceptible, or some bodies are more susceptible to having apnea, which is complete cessation. Other people will have a huge number of hypopneas, but they don't have the apneas. It suggests that their physiology is different, okay? So just something to think of, and I would probably, for all analyses, always use age and sex. Unfortunately, we do not collect gender, but we did collect sex. Gender is, of course, in our new sort of revised data set we're working on now. Here. Sarah, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's good. Also, collecting, maybe the intensity, like you talked about, apnea versus hypopnea is important. Things like the blood oxygen saturation. If someone is, maybe they're not having as many events, but their oxygen saturation is really low, that can also have a big effect on other health conditions later in life. So that might be something to look into.
Yeah. And in terms of some that Sarah talked about, also, I guess the question is like the sleepiness. Yeah. So some people will be like, they may not have very much sleep apnea, but they're still super sleepy, right? Is that truly sleep apnea, or is that something else? So just any things to think about just on this side there, yeah.
We actually have a question coming in from online from Ali Reza, so thank you so much. How biased would the data be while sleeping with so many wires attached compared to sleeping in comfort at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually do a lot of work on home sleep apnea tests, which we don't have the data for this, so we didn't talk too much about it, but that is nice to kind of get a more realistic home environment. It is, I have been a guinea pig myself. I have slept in the sleep lab. It is pretty uncomfortable, but you do kind of end up falling asleep, and you don't need too much sleep to kind of get a good picture. We usually take at least 4 hours is the bench line for collecting enough data to measure sleep apnea or something like that. It's definitely an important consideration, and one reason why having home sleep apnea testing for people who can't sleep in a sleep lab is important.
Thanks, Sarah. We've also published, if you go to psgnorms.com, we do have a paper our group published in the Lancet a couple of years ago that does provide normal polysomnography metrics. So what we did is, this was an extremely boring project, but what we did is, the results are important, I think. We did a meta-analysis of all normal control groups in the whole literature and put them all together, and then control for age, sex, night of sleep study, and so on and so forth. And the bottom line is that we have normative values, okay? So again, you get PSG norms.com, and then you'll see it will redirect to a page and that's hosted by the Ottawa Research Health Institute, because that's our collaborator. Is there any other questions? Yeah. So do you
So you talked a lot about sleep disturbances. I'm wondering if too much sleep is ever linked with any health disorders.
Yeah, so too little sleep is linked. So basically the number is usually 6 to 9, okay? So most adults need 6 to 9 hours of sleep. Too little sleep is linked with a whole host of bad things like heart attack, stroke, blah, 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 whatever. But, and then also too much sleep, 9 hours or more, is also linked with the same, basically. It's basically like a U curve. It's linked with the same. So increased risk of heart attack, stroke, death, all that kind of stuff there, eh? But I don't want to scare the daylights out of anybody, okay? Because everyone has interpersonal variability. Like, you're going to be different than me. I'm going to be different than Sarah, and some because just we're different people, right? And some people need more sleep, Some people just need like 9 or 10 hours of sleep. And if that's what you need to feel refreshed, that's completely fine. That's completely fine, all right? At times of illness, none of those rules apply. So if you're down with the flu, or everybody's got the flu over the last couple of weeks and months, and you need 10 hours of sleep or 12 hours of sleep to feel like, okay, that's completely fine during times. If you break your arm and you feel tired or something, that's totally okay. But I'm talking about, generally speaking, most people need somewhere between 6 and 9 hours, and there's probably between 7 and 9 hours of sleep is probably better. Okay, so but again, 9 or more hours is usually indicative of maybe someone has an underlying medical condition like depression or something that they want to be in bed all the time and so on and so forth, okay?
Yeah. We have another question from the online audience. This is from Justin. Apologize if I missed this, but was data collected on racial and ethnic groups, given that some groups have a higher prevalence of sleep apnea than others?
Do you want to discuss that?
Yeah, so in the questionnaires, there's kind of demographic information. So one of the columns of data that you'll see includes ethnicity. And yeah, there's a pretty wide list of things, I think. Consult the data and the legend for information on that.
Oh, we have lots of questions here. I think I saw your hand first, so we'll go here.
I was just wondering, what markers do you use to say that, oh, this is an apnea event or a hypopnea event or a normal event? Do you just look at the fibers, or is there like a oxygen saturation level?
Yeah, so for apnea and hypopneas, we're kind of looking majority at the flow information. So that's the nasal cannula. And an apnea is at least kind of 90% decrease in flow from regular rhythm. A hypopnea is 30% decrease plus an associated decrease in blood oxygen saturation. So there's kind of different markers. We use 4% decrease or an arousal. So that's kind of marked in the clinical scored data where it kind of starts and stops.
I believe it's part of the I believe it's part of the EDF file. Okay, so that's EDF stands for European Data Format, and you're going to see it actually if you do. I stand to be corrected. I know for sure EEG because I do EEG in sleep research, but it might be for other data collection types as well. Okay, but basically that's the standard for how they mark. So after the technologist, basically the sleep technologist, as Sarah mentioned, will look for those events that Sarah just discussed and flag them, and then that will be transferred as part of the raw data, and typically in the EDF format. Okay.
I think there's a question over here that I'll get to, and then I'll get to yours after.
I know you guys mentioned how machine learning can really improve sleep technologists. Do you foresee any additional burden with integrating these metrics with sleep technologists, with adoption and things like that?
Yeah, sorry. Can you repeat again? You said how would we adapt it or put in? Yeah, so I would say that potentially for the sleep lab, maybe an algorithm can go through it all first, right, and score the whole thing up, and then And then, if there's any question points where it wasn't clear, I think that's where you need an experienced human being who knows what they're doing to go, like an expert, to go in there and take a look at that. So I don't think you're going to eliminate, again, sleep technologists' jobs, but you will need to, there's always a human touch, right, to double check things over. Just like I don't want my sleep study read by a machine, right? And we do this actually now, right? So our home sleep tests are actually scored automatically. And then Sarah, or one of our graduate students, will go through the data and then review it with myself as the final sort of run, right? So it isn't so foreign to have a machine go through the data and give a summary thing, but the overall final sign off and a review of the literature a review of the data has to be done by a human being who knows what they're doing. Ideally, someone certified in that area. So, and we've caught things I remember one time a couple of years ago, we were reviewing a home sleep test. All the data was just very, very low amplitude, and the computer thought, or the algorithm thought, that it was a whole bunch of apneas, but if you looked at it very carefully, it wasn't. So it gave an a very severe sleep apnea, but the person was actually normal. It was just too little, and there had been bad data and so on. So anyway, you need someone, again, algorithms will get better with time, don't get me wrong, but you need someone who can oversee all that. So I don't think, but I do see, though, it can assist us, can make things more efficient, and probably more importantly, can flag, like, this person needs to be reviewed first, right? Because you know what I mean? So, because we run 6 studies a night, unless if the technologist has been watching, which they actually, our technologists at Sunnybrook do watch and flag for the most urgent ones, the ones that need the most urgent care right away. But not all labs do that. An algorithm can help prioritize and triage who should be, managed first, right? Yeah.
I think we'll do one more question. I know there was one over here.
Hello. I don't know if I misheard you, but you mentioned that sleep can be prediction of the cancer. So the 2 questions that I have is it specific cancer that we have in mind, and how established this link is? Like, is it just speculation, or is there a lot of research that showed this link?
Yeah, there's a number of papers. I would say that the link is, it's hard, right? Because in the modeling that we did control for other conditions as well. I can direct you to the paper if you send me an email, okay? All right, and I can send you also but you can also see there's also other literature as well that sort of points towards that direction. But, if you have sleep apnea, will you die of cancer? I don't know. It's very, very, God forbid, you know what I mean? Because it's very hard. Sleep apnea is also linked with lots of other things too. And, when you look at things, complex conditions like stroke, cancer, and so on and so forth, this is usually multifactorial, right? I wouldn't just say sleep apnea, you're in trouble for that. Like, for example, we don't do cancer screening on all our sleep apnea patients, right? That's just not possible, right? But just people are forewarned, Yeah. Does that sort of answer your question? Honestly, I'd have to check back on the paper. I don't know. I can't remember now. I can't remember now.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much to Dr. Mark Boulos and Sarah Berger for presenting this talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us here, and thank you for the very kind invitation. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
And great questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.